Hello, everyone. I'm Joe Kane, a fellow at Brookings Metro, focusing on infrastructure issues, and I'm excited you could join us today for our event on accelerating local climate investment amid federal uncertainty. I think the timing for this event could not be more important or urgent given the headlines we're seeing every day. Here in Washington, D.C., there's been a continual stream of executive orders, policy shifts, and mounting questions around federal climate funding and programming. Across the country, there has been a literal flood of devastation and loss, as we've seen in places like Texas. The ultimate environmental and economic consequences of these actions and events are still unfolding in real time and only seemingly intensifying. But we also know or hear that many state and local leaders are continuing to take climate action, whether out of necessity or driven by proactive planning. Governors, mayors, and other policymakers and practitioners are continuing to launch new investments. Renewable energy projects, including solar and wind, are still happening. Cleaner transportation options, including transit upgrades and electric vehicle charging stations, are still happening. Building improvements, including weatherization, are still happening. And a wide range of water and green infrastructure improvements are still happening. So we ask, how are leaders still making these investments? How are they addressing different challenges along the way, including potentially with less funding and fewer staff? How are they navigating the current federal moment and looking beyond it? Climate action isn't just about the here and now, but requires sustained, committed investment over time, especially across different places. Mitigating and adapting to climate impacts remains an evolving priority, supported by public and private action. It's a shared challenge and opportunity to test new collaborations, form new plans, and implement new solutions. That's why I'm incredibly excited for today's conversation to hear more from these leaders directly about what they're doing and how they're doing it. Since our event also coincides with Pacific Northwest Climate Week, I think it's also a good time to reflect upon and amplify lessons we're seeing in different parts of the country. The devil is often in the details, geographically, financially, and otherwise, how leaders are executing on their climate needs. In a few minutes, I'll be handing the mic to my colleague Jan Whittington to moderate a panel of city leaders from Boston, Austin, and Santa Barbara. And later, we'll also hear from Governor Bob Ferguson of Washington State to get a better sense of what state leaders are thinking and doing. But first, I'm delighted to welcome Mayor Bruce Harrell of Seattle. Mayor Harrell and his team have long thought about and activated different climate investments across the region, offering precedent, I think, for many other leaders considering or taking action all across the country. So, Mayor, it's terrific to see you and look forward to hearing more about all the great work you're continuing to lead.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you for that kind introduction. I'm very excited to share a few thoughts. I remind everyone when talking about climate change and our fight to save our planet and our water and our air, that this is one of the few fights we could do with a smile on our face. And so I will try to smile, even though we have some very challenging times in front of us. Again, I want to thank everyone here that's watching or listening, the local leaders, the change makers, discussing how we can really push forward with our climate goals. Perhaps I'll start off with our own story here in Seattle that I think might be of interest. In 2023, the city of Seattle received a $4 million grant from the EPA funded by the bipartisan infrastructure law to help support our circular wood economy and zero waste goals. So basically, this is one part of a $61.6 million grant in federal dollars that Seattle received under the Biden-Harris administration to help advance our climate goals and our sustainability goals. And what this project actually would entail would be it would allow us to develop a new salvaged wood warehouse where we could process, store, and distribute over 150 tons of salvaged wood every year. Sort of called it our Good Wood Project. And we'd reduce construction waste that would end up in our landfill. So this is a project we're really excited about. Well, we're working on a press release about the results of this investment a couple of years later. And the new administration, the Trump administration, their EPA asked us to remove 3 words. Now, here, at least under my administration, we pride ourselves in being collaborative and we listen to feedback and we always want to improve. I said very earlier, we are a learning organization. So please give us the feedback. Their request is that we remove the word natural when referring to materials like wood, equity when discussing the creation of new green jobs, and climate to reflect what is their obvious denial of the climate crisis. Well, we looked at that, and again, trying to always understand another person's perspective or another administration's perspective, and there was a little bit of push and pull, and suffice to say, we didn't have a meeting of the minds, and so um, we believe that's sort of more symptomatic of their fight over semantics is more symptomatic of their flat out attempt to or agenda to dismantle the climate strategies that we're putting in place and perhaps support free activities, free private activities from regulatory constraints. And we think that that's just bad policy. So at this critical moment, when our federal government, in at least my opinion, is choosing to abdicate responsibility for combating the climate crisis, as I think Joe mentioned, we see an article every day on sort of how this plays out. Now, I do a lot of work with different organizations and including Brookings, and I want to again give Brookings Metro just a plug for creating the kind of think tank and energy and synergy that really is going to help us to get this work done. In my capacity with other mayoral organizations, it is very clear, that cities are closest to the impacts of climate change. We don't have the ability not to be in the coffee shops or in the parks or at the ball games to talk about people who are feeling the real impacts of climate change. Our local strategies, I think, will be absolutely critical to our success. Where national governments, in this case, seem to be failing us, it will take the local leadership to step up as I think, the problem solvers. A C4 Cities poll found that 82% of cities are taking more ambitious climate action than the national government. So here, local government can indeed lead. Very proud that Seattle, and many of the policies we've implemented and a lot of our climate goals and plans have been recognized as a national and global leader on climate for decades. And over my term as mayor for the last several years, we've established policies to decarbonize our large buildings, incentives for homeowners to transition to electric heat pumps, expanded community tree planting programs to encourage shared stewardship of our urban forests. And we're making real progress toward establishing resilience hubs for extreme weather. Now, I have to take a little point of privilege, if I may have a glass of water here. As we all understand in politics or even in life that words truly matter. And my personal privilege is to share my personal background. My mother is of Japanese descent and my father is an African American, which sort of puts me right in the middle there. And I've learned when being taught as a child that the best way for me to communicate with people are to find out quickly what we have in common, because I didn't have a lot of children with that same combination growing up. And I found that my language was always one of a unifying basis, always trying to find what I had in common with people all around me, no matter who they were, what their demographics were. And I tell you that story to say that in our climate language, this is a unifying element, regardless of the demographic. Rich, poor, anyone in between, however you define demographics, when we're talking about clean air and clean water and the beauty of a tree, we're talking about environmental sustainability. This seems to be one of the most unifying elements we can have, particularly at a time where divisiveness is all around us. And so in our language here, I try to lead by example in making sure that all communities are being heard. We do know that many communities are less well off, or many are struggling with just to pay their light bill or to get around from A to B. And that's why we're so transit dependent here, and we invest so much in transit and safety. Affordability and economic inequality are some of the biggest concerns in our entire country right now. Excuse me for keep clearing my throat. But we need to make the case that reducing greenhouse gas emissions can create a new climate economy, lower costs, deliver tangible benefits for working families and people. And it sort of should be a kitchen table conversation. And that's why I tie it into a unifying conversation. This is something we all could rally around because it affects us on a very personal basis. So in Seattle, an example would be our labor partners. We bring them to the table. And while their focus could be and should be on jobs, we realize that the green economy is where a lot of the action will be, where the action is. So in our building emissions performance standards policy, affectionately known as BEPS, BEPS, that again has been nationally recognized, we worked very collaboratively with our labor advocates who in fact became our messengers in this work in order, particularly in a situation where after recovering from COVID, we're trying to get buildings occupied and we're trying to get small businesses and medium businesses, the wheels of commerce cranked back up for them. We cannot leave people behind in this fight. And that's why I go back to what I said about it being a unifying conversation. Now, we're very fortunate here that we have employers like Amazon and Microsoft and Boeing and Expedia and Starbucks, large companies here that understand this plight. And I think the beauty, the low-hanging fruit is that the younger generation, and when my wife and I have three children, so they remind us that that is still a ways down the road. When we say the younger generation, they look at me as the grandparents. The younger generation, they get the climate fight. And the good part for the large companies we are finding is that those that are doing the most in this regard can attract the kind of talent necessary for them to establish their core competency as a corporation. In other words, the talent are looking at the corporate social responsibility relative to climate change and saying, is this a company I can get behind? So we here take pride in the fact that we think alliances between private investors, philanthropic partners, regional agencies, and our neighboring cities and state governments are absolutely the key to our success. Again, I welcome opportunities to go into the large workplaces of some of the large employers to talk about climate change. And I think many of you know who's visited Seattle that we are a port city. We are a gateway for global trade and thousands of jobs in our region. And so again, our partnership at the port becomes critical. We're working closely with them, advancing sustainability around their cargo shipments and what they do. Their competency is a port. So this would include shore power for cruise ships, incentivizing electrification for heavy duty trucks to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and especially in those neighborhoods that are in our industrial lands. And the industrial land policy that we put forward a few years ago really sort of set the tone for our commitment to fight climate change. One last point I want to make, and sort of in closing, is that our partnering with philanthropic communities, again, has been just phenomenal. We established what we call an Elliott Bay Connections Project, which is a new pedestrian and bicycle greenway along our beautiful, beautiful waterfront that is entirely privately funded to the tune of $45 million that came, again, from the philanthropic community. So this particular project will expand our beautiful green space and restore our beach habitat, strengthen car-free connections at a time when Seattle will host our World Cup in 2026. And I hope all of you visit one of the host cities, and I'd be honored if you'd come here to Seattle to visit the World Cup in 2026. So we do know that less than 2% of global philanthropy is dedicated to funding solutions to the climate crisis. And I mentioned that statistic just to reiterate the point that government will not be able to do this alone. Private corporations cannot do this alone. Working families cannot do this alone. And I go back to my earlier point. This has to be a unifying narrative for us to accomplish this. And and the enemy of that will be divisiveness that we continue to see. So again, in closing, I recognize fully we have headwinds from the federal government. This is not the time for cities to scale back at all. In fact, it's a time to shine, as I tell many people in the fight on immigration and refugee issues. I tell people in the Medicaid space arguing for stronger protections for those that can't afford market rate healthcare. I tell them this is the time to fight and shine. That for many communities, particularly communities that I identify with, we are known for being resilient, that nothing has come easy. And climate change is the long game. We're not going to solve it in the next couple of years anyway. But we can do is every single day of our life, we can think of a policy or take an action to implement the policy to save our planet. And so in the headwind of what we're getting from the federal government, this is the time to double down. And conversations like this, I hope there's some level of inspiration that are found, because every single day I'm inspired. Even when I read the article today about an Alaska project and a sort of a reneging on a solar project and what politicians are going through with this current administration, I find inspiration on plowing ahead, doing the right thing. So thank you for having me, and I look forward to hearing from the other speakers as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor Harrell, and the City of Seattle. And it's been wonderful to hear these opening remarks and inspiring to all of us to fight the good fight, and a reminder that we're all in this together. It's been wonderful to have you. Thanks for joining us today. So I'm Jan Whittington. I'm an associate professor of urban design and planning here at the University of Washington, also located in the city of Seattle. And I'm a senior non-resident fellow of Brookings Metro. I've been working with cities on climate finance for over 20 years in the US and abroad. And I want to thank all of you who are joining us today for this talk about accelerating city climate finance in a time of federal uncertainty. So at this point, I'd like to invite our esteemed panelists to go ahead and turn on their cameras and join the conversation. I am absolutely delighted today to be joined by panelists who bring decades of experience helping their cities tackle climate change from across the United States. And before we launch into the questions, a word to our audience. If you have any questions for our panelists today, please do send them to event@brookings.edu. Thank you. So let us begin. Let's start with introductions, if we could. If Zach, Alelia, and Oliver, if you could be so kind as to introduce yourself and the roles that you play in your respective cities. Zach?
Thanks, Jan. I'm Zach Bauer. I'm the director of the Office of Climate Action and Resilience here at the City of Austin, Texas. I'm in our city manager's office and work across our entire city organization on climate resilience, on greenhouse gas mitigation, on sustainable food issues, urban forestry issues, and implementing projects and programs across the city and our community.
Great. Alelia, if you could contribute.
Thanks, Jan. Yeah, Alelia Parento. I'm the Sustainability and Resilience Director for the City of Santa Barbara. And similar to Zach, we oversee a wide range of issues, including energy, climate, adaptation, creeks and water quality, so watershed and stormwater, and solid waste issues. We are our own department, so we interact as a colleague to the other departments, which is nice.
Wonderful. Thank you. Oliver?
Hi, Jen. I'm Oliver Sellers Garcia. I joined the city of Boston about 3 years ago as Mayor Wu's Green New Deal director. And in that role, I am in the mayor's office working across the city, helping different agencies develop their climate agenda, and build their projects and initiatives to execute on it. About a year ago, the mayor also asked me to take over the environment department. So I have two titles. I'm also the environment commissioner, and that is running a about 45-person team that is responsible for energy, climate planning, pollution control, more traditional environmental issues, and we spun out from that a resilience office. So that sort of falls under the citywide work that I do, but that now also has its own leader and much more visibility inside of Boston.
Wonderful, wonderful. I'm wondering if we could take a bit of time for you to share with us the sort of origin story of climate action for your city, and help us understand how your city is organized to tackle climate change. And what I mean by that is that people may not realize the extent to which cities differ in how they are organized in general. The cities have some cities have very different array of services. Like some municipalities contain utilities that provide energy, water, wastewater, ports, and so on. And cities can really differ in terms of, and you're hinting in this with your introductions, but cities can really differ in terms of how they're organized to tackle climate change as well. So if you could each take a moment to describe that origin story and give us a sense of how you're organized, that'd be great. Zach, why don't we go ahead and start with you again?
Great. Yeah, in the city of Austin, sort of two defining characteristics of our city. The first one is that we are a council manager form of government. So our mayor is one of our 11 city council members. And then our organization is governed by the city manager. So I'm connected to the city manager's office, so I'm not directly connected to a mayor. So that's an important characteristic. The other one is that we are fairly large and have a good amount of control in terms of local government. So we have 15,000 employees here at the city of Austin. We own our own power utility, our own water utility, solid waste, drainage utility, transportation and public works. So we are a very large organization. And when you think about climate change, we own power plants. We're responsible for supplying water to our residents. And those things play large roles in terms of our mitigation activities and our resilience and adaptation activities. Climate work here at the city of Austin, goes all the way back to 2007. So the city has a really long history of environmental activism that really started with water quality issues and our beloved Barton Springs here in the Austin area. But our mayor and city council passed its first resolutions to reduce greenhouse gas emissions back in 2007. So we've been working on this issue for many, many years. And our resilience and climate adaptation work started about 2013, 14, as we have pretty extreme weather to begin with here in the Austin area. But as we experience some flash floods and the drought of record, wildfires, extreme heat, those extreme weather events really brought to light that climate change was real. It was happening quicker than we thought, and it was really affecting those services of delivering power and water, or protecting our residents from flooding and fire that really woke us up to like, we need to be doing more about this and thinking more about this now.
Right. Wonderful. Thank you for that introduction. Alelia, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm the baby city of this panel. We are 92,000 people, so much, much smaller than Zach and Oliver's metropolitan areas, but we are mighty. I mean, we are the birthplace of Earth Day. Many people don't know that. The 1969 oil spill happened here off the Santa Barbara coast, and that's where Earth Day began. And so we pride ourselves on that and have long had this legacy of environmental stewardship. It wasn't until two major council decisions happened, and we, similar to Zach, are a council manager city. So council, the mayor's one of 7 council members, and then we have a city manager who directs us. But in 2017, our city council voted to have 100% renewable electricity community-wide. So not just for the city organization, but community-wide. So that was really important. And then in 2020, they adopted a carbon neutrality goal by 2035. And these two things catapulted the not only the work that we do, but also the creation of this department, because previously a lot of our work was sort of in-facing on the municipal organization. But 92% of our electricity needs are from the community, from without the organization. So we did what's called community choice aggregation, also big in Massachusetts, where the municipality takes over the energy supply function. What that allowed us to do was overnight flip a switch, and all of our electricity was carbon free, and all within the state of California. This did create a revenue stream for a department, which is something that I know we're sort of touching upon in this panel, and it was really critical. But in 2020, the department was formed with that community choice aggregation function under it, and pulled in some other departments that were throughout the organization. We went from a staff of 5 to a staff of 45. So again, Boston has 45 people, Santa Barbara has 45 people. Like this city has really prioritized sustainable action. And that has only been possible because we are not general funded. So for any city folks out there, general fund is tax dollars. So sales tax, property tax, bed tax, any other tax revenues that you have. And those are usually fought over by departments. And a lot of sustainability offices and departments are funded by those, and so often come under threat when there's a budget crisis. In Santa Barbara, it was really important to us that that didn't happen. So we are completely enterprise funded, meaning we have trash rates that fund us because it's in our department, energy rates, and then we do have a bed tax adder that is for creeks, water quality, and stormwater mitigation. Similar again to Zach, we founded our adaptation and resilience division in the last year. And what's unique about that division is actually those funding sources don't fund it. It was recognized that Santa Barbara, if the waterfront experiences sea level rise, it affects the entire city organization because that is a tourism hub. It's our commercial fishery hub. And so the entire city organization funds the positions in the adaptation and resilience division. And that's been an interesting, very collaborative, a lot of ownership throughout the organization in the resilience work.
Wonderful. And thank you. Yeah, it's a pleasant reminder. I grew up in California, not far from Santa Barbara, and it's a pleasant reminder that the Earth Day, the origin of Earth Day came from that area. Oliver, help us understand the origin of climate action in
Yes.
Boston.
Well, we're the origin of the revolution, so there's also that. Which is its 250th. So there's a lot going on in Boston for the next year. So this is helpful to have Zach and Alelia go first because I will try to hit some comparison points. But so we're a strong mayor system. So Mayor Wu is both the leader of the city government, but also sort of we execute and deliver on city services. Maybe we can go back to the issue of sort of like how our city is overall funded, because I do think it has some interesting state implications and some of the other things I know we're going to talk about. But we are the capital of New England. We're the largest city in all of New England, but we are a city of, depending on how you measure and believe the census, we're close to 700,000 in a metro area of like 3.5 million. So interesting that we are by far the largest city, but we are a small portion of the metro area. And I think that's in a way reflected in some pretty key components of climate delivery that are outside of city government. So we do not control the transit system. In fact, it was a huge win for Mayor Wu to have a ability to name one person to the board of the transit agency, the state transit agency, a couple years ago. Investor-owned utilities. We do own our water and sewer, but there's actually a regional authority that manages water supply. So a lot of the key sort of infrastructure sectors are not owned by the city. And just another interesting stat, we have 47 miles of coastline. The city owns around 16% of it, and then there's 50% owned by the state and 30% by private developers. So then if you think about like where infrastructure happens, that's also a limitation on our end. And then in terms of how we sort of govern and deliver on climate, we've been, I mean, like my peers here, we were all sort of at the cutting edge of developing climate plans around 20 years ago. And there, as I understand the history, really was, you know, a mayoral priority executed by the Environment Department with some consultation by different departments. And now we're really in a very different phase. My position, just one of a few that really big organizational changes to embed climate throughout the city. Last year, the mayor created through an executive order a climate council, which is 13 different agencies that are like, responsible for delivering on climate change. So I can't remember all of them, but think diversity ranging from like housing and transportation, which makes a lot of sense, to enabling ones, for example, finance and community engagement, and then also some really immediate direct services like our Office of Emergency Management. And I think that that evolution reflects, I think, what we're all doing in the municipal climate field, which is a real shift from planning to implementation. We continue to plan. We're actually doing climate action plan update right now, but it is a very different sort of task that the city of Boston or other cities had for the first 15 or 20 years, which was to raise awareness, point out issues. And now we're really going through I'll just be honest, like difficult process of retooling a bureaucracy to do delivery as opposed to awareness and research.
No, that's fair. I think it's a sentiment shared across a lot of cities here in the U.S. and abroad. Absolutely. So let's talk about let's switch gears a little bit if we could, and talk about the question that is on a lot of people's minds these days. I mean, looking at the headlines every day, if and this is one of the reasons, I mean, I think that for me this is the main reason I wanted to bring you all together for this conversation today. If my understanding of our capacity in the US to tackle climate change revolved entirely around decisions made in Washington, D.C., I would feel really whipsawed by the changes in administration that we've had over the past decade. I'd be bordering on despair over our collective effects and impacts on climate change. But I wanted to have this conversation with you all because I believe that there's a different story to tell, that and in fact, cities are stewards of more than we might think, and cities have their own revenues, their own budgets for capital and operations. They have their own capacity for debt financing. More importantly, I think that the climate begins and ends. I believe climate begins and ends at the local level with our emissions and our climate exacerbated hazards that we're all experiencing. So this, despite the political wins at the federal and perhaps state level, what we see is that cities persist in facing this problem. So but I correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, share with our audience and with me, if you will, how do conditions at the federal and state level actually affect your ability to take action on climate? Um, and I mean, we might as well keep going in the same order. We can, of course, mix it up as we go. Zach, why don't you give it a go?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, as you mentioned, we have our own control, our own revenues, our own power. Um, and here, our city council, is the board of directors for our utility for all of the all of the different departments and solutions that we have here. So they set the direction, they approve the budget, they set us on our course. So, we have council adopted climate equity plan, council adopted resilience plans, council adopted water utility plans, power utility plans. Every single one of those plans incorporates greenhouse gas reduction and resilience actions and projections of how climate change is going to affect our work. So the work of our city implementing climate action goes on whatever is happening at the state level or the federal level. And that's really a result of time and commitment, right? Folks have been working on this for so long in our city. You have individuals that have been, studying and working on this for major parts of their career. And I think we're getting to a point where anyone that we, hire into our utilities or into these major parts of our organization, they know this is real. They understand it, and it's just incorporated into the work that we do. And I think as Oliver said, we're really at this point now of like not as much trying to study or project out, what are these dream solutions or what are these silver bullets that are going to solve this problem. We're just working on the nuts and bolts of implementing renewable energy, implementing public transportation, engaging with our community to participate. And the reality is that work, while it could be enhanced and sped up by participation with the state or support from the federal level, it's going to go on whether or not we have their support or not. And I think the thing is that it's not just about the environment, right? It's about protecting people's health. It's protecting our community. It's about quality of life. It's about clean air and water that are values that, the mayor said a few minutes ago. Those are things that everybody agrees to, and are really a part of having Austin be a livable city and having this be an attractive place for people to live and work, and to call home.
Yeah, wonderful. Alelia.
Yeah, I love what Zach just said. I think he's really right about the sort of ancillary benefits of climate action, right? It's not just about greenhouse gas reduction, it's all of these other benefits. The thing I wanted to say first is we've been here before, right? This is a second term. We had this freak out moment last time. And in Santa Barbara, at least, and widely across California, I think it really galvanized people. I think maybe more work got done in the first Trump term, because we were so freaked out about the lack of federal support. This does feel a little different. Not gonna lie, this feels a little different this time, but I see those same coalitions organizing, and quite frankly, maybe for the bigger cities this is different, but it is not worth our time to work with the federal government. Like the dollars we get from the Fed is so much actually more costly than funds we can get elsewhere. Additionally, cities are more nimble. Like we are just nimble. We can pivot quickly. The biggest impact we're feeling from the Trump administration is not funding. As I mentioned, we're pretty self-funded, but it's the cancellation of the California waivers. So for any, state law cannot supersede federal law unless they get a waiver. And so in California, we have a number of waivers that are climate inclined, including the ban of sale of internal combustion engines after 2035, advanced clean fleets. And those were, as Zach said, great accelerators for the work that we do. And those are being canceled right now. So that's a little bit challenging, right, to still steer the ship in that direction. The benefit is that we have science on our side. People aren't debating in our area whether climate change is real. And one of the most, interesting moments of the 2024 election cycle was I did listen to the 3-hour interview between Trump and Joe Rogan. And Joe Rogan asked Trump 3 times, what about climate change? What about climate change? And if Joe Rogan's asking that question, like we are in a new era. So I think that's good news, right? And then I apologize for the callousness of this next statement, especially for Texas right now, but never waste a good crisis. like that we are in a crisis mode, and like, don't waste it. This is the time to use that crisis and leverage it to accelerate action. And we can definitely do that at the local level.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you. Oliver, what say you?
Yeah, it's some similar themes. I would say that so just let's just like thinking about it from a dollars perspective. We it's funny, like I have like my slide deck that I go around and I tell everyone, and I was like, before the election, I was like, this is once in a generation funding, but I hope it's not really once in a generation. And now I think that has proved to be the case. But you know, we received over $150 million of competitive funding from the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and Inflation Reduction Act. We estimate that, through the state and some partners, there was about $500 million that we were going to indirectly benefit from. So that's enormous dollars. But I think all of us knew that it was probably more kind of like at a catalytic scale than anything more sustainable. And just to give you an example on one area that is extremely important to Boston, because 70% of our emissions come from existing buildings, and we have an incredible housing affordability crisis. I know a lot of cities do, but it's just really squeezing us here in Boston. And so we took about $20 million of our COVID recovery funds and put them into very rich, um, deep decarbonization delivery programs that two different parts of our housing agency did with large buildings and with small buildings. And the large building one was sort of amplified a little bit with state funding from Massachusetts. And we were sort of realizing all the way along that we were never going to have incentives like this to do anything, and so like long term. So while this might cover several thousand units, it was just an ability for us to learn how to do this. Inflation Reduction Act allowed us to sort of it directly and indirectly have roughly the same amount, but spread over way more sort of like diffuse ways to support it. So like to help with implementing our building performance standard, or with some of our CDC partners and helping them do some decarbonization in little places. So again, it's sort of like the drop off of impact was already happening with the huge funding from the federal government. Now, of course, I would have wanted more funding to come, but we knew that this was going to happen anyway. And so our sort of big announcement in this space this year is that we are creating a new program, because in Massachusetts, we're very fortunate to have very good energy efficiency and decarbonization incentives that we all pay for, but are administered by the utilities. And we're investing our resources to really help the utilities market and deliver their incentives in a way that they have never been able to before. And so that is going to bring in $150 million alone in existing incentives that the utilities have, for the first time, agreed to carve out for City of Boston recipients, because it's proportional, but it is never what they have actually been able to hit without our help. And so I know I kind of drilled into an example here, but I hope it gives you a sense of like things have changed, but we would love more funding. We would love more support in these areas, but we were always already planning to pivot, and we're actually going to be able to do it at a bigger scale in this particular area without federal. And so the one tiny thing I'll add is that I totally agree with Alelia. I think more than dollars, it's some of these policy changes that are going to have an enormous impact. Like, what is going to happen to New England wind is absolutely critical to everything that we have going on in terms of our new building code that is basically requiring renewable energy, all of our existing building regulations, what we're trying to do in, as a city with our own footprint. I mean, that is going to be much more disruptive than any funding that we had received.
Well, and the great, thank you for sharing that. So I'm wondering, Alelia, let's just launch right into, do you have a mitigation action or success story, something you want to highlight for our audience today, or something like that you'd like to call attention to in your mitigation story for your city?
Yeah, as I mentioned in the organizational genesis story, doing our community choice aggregation, which is Santa Barbara Clean Energy, where the city took on the load supply for the electrical utility. Um, I mean, that was a huge benefit. As I mentioned, it dramatically reduced our greenhouse gas emissions. But not only that, it created two things: a relationship with the consumer, right? Where we could create sort of a behavioral program to try and change behavior. We could also, California has some of the highest electricity rates in the nation. So we could now create a power dynamic, pun intended, where they could take control of some of that cost through smart buildings, demand response, and other kind of innovative rate structures. We now have control of designing those, and we're not for profit. The investor-owned utilities in our state are. And not only are they for profit, they're guaranteed a rate of return of 12%, which I would love on any investment. So it's a broken system, which we have been able to slightly rectify by becoming the energy supplier. So tremendous greenhouse gas emission reductions, tremendous partnership potential with our community, and it's given us a revenue stream to create some of these incentives like what Oliver was mentioning. I mean, we're still so nascent in the heat pump technology world and the EV world that it's really important to still sort of like add a lot of carrots to the process. And so that has been hands down the biggest climate action that the city has taken, and really fruitful for advancing our goals.
Oh, wonderful. And Zach, you want to chime in, or you're welcome to also share an adaptation story. It's up to you.
Sure. Let's see we'll share an adaptation story. So I'd say that a real success that we've experienced is partnership between universities and researchers
Mm,
on studying climate change and future projections of
mm,
temperature and precipitation, and building that into our planning at the city. So we've worked with researchers for many years to understand projections of climate change. Now we have a specific initiative called the UT City Climate CoLab, which is a collaboration between University of Texas researchers and city staff to take that climatological information and make it actually useful and actually turn it into to reality. So an example of that is our water utility, Austin Water. They've incorporated those climate projections into their 100-year water plan. So they're actually planning for what does a different water future look like here in Austin? What does extreme drought look like? And how do we build our water supply and demand portfolios into the long term, and get started on projects right now so we are prepared for that extreme drought and those drier conditions and hotter conditions that we know that we're going to experience in the future. And so that is turning science and study and research into actual real engineering and projects that are going to be implemented in our water utility, to make sure that we have the water for the long term.
Yeah, very important point. These forecasts are not for the faint of heart. I mean, how extreme will extreme precipitation be, and what does that portend for flooding? How deep and how prolonged will drought be? And you're each in different geographic regions of the United States have somewhat different exposure to different hazards, but also some similarities. And the wildfires of LA are still fresh in a lot of people's minds, but I understand Santa Barbara has been experiencing those and related landslides and mudslides for some time as well.
Yeah, and that was sort of the reason I shared the don't waste a good crisis. I mean, the Montecito debris flow, which was basically a mudslide, which resulted from tremendous rain after a wildfire and destabilization of the bank, was our biggest loss of life in Santa Barbara in a long, long time. 24 people died, and it was horrible But if I can be allowed a but, it did catapult our climate work. People understood, right, that this is not an intangible that's, decades and decades away. It's here now. And so absolutely, I think that now we're much more attuned, and the Los Angeles fires, this is probably a whole other panel. It's not having the result that we were hoping in terms of galvanizing climate action. It's kind of having the opposite, but the wildfire thing is a huge risk. Yeah.
Oliver, I know that you mentioned in your introductory remarks, you commented on coastline, and Boston has had a lot to say about, design guidelines and other things in coastal habitats. So I'm wondering if you could comment on that or other issues and approaches you're taking.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I do think we're known as a coastal city, and it's probably of our climate hazards, the one that has gotten the most attention. All 47 miles of coastline have sort of, community-based conceptual designs for protection already in place. And I do actually think this is a spot where the federal government is actually still here with us. The U.S. Army Corps is still doing a sort of, long-term design study to figure out which of the planned interventions they will design and fund, and how much we then get to add to green and improve the quality of life components to them. And that's primarily focused on some of the flood pathways that are sort of known to be absolutely critical. What I will say, if you'll allow me, is just to like pivot a little bit from coastal flooding, which is to say that I think one of the biggest accomplishments we've made in this administration is to really scale down to the um, quality of life and justice elements that touch some of our other climate hazards. And this is something that, I think of as great successes, but then it's hard to really think about how you scale them up. But like just a couple examples, which is that in an effort to really do something about heat rather than just measure it, which is what everyone wants to do. Um, we, for example, in our segmentation of like what can we actually do about it, we've created a great partnership with our Office of Early Childhood, which oversees all of the daycare centers, and there's over 600 at-home daycare centers in Boston, for example, that are often in rental low-income multifamily units. And so we're doing a lot of targeted help there, not just with the buildings, but also with like play activities and different ways to like learn about how to keep families safe while they're using the facilities and also traveling to them. Or our Office of Emergency Management is doing a lot of work specifically with basement units, which are often illegal, not permitted units, and have a lot of vulnerable folks in them. But we're taking a very different sort of inspections approach to figure out how to reach people who live there. So I think, again, when it comes to actually doing things, we look at the resources that we have and how we can apply them in a way that prioritizes communities that have just sort of never been put at the very front of the line because they're not maybe the easiest to reach, but that are going to have a lot more beneficial impact. And that's a lot of the resilience work that we're doing now.
Wonderful. So we are almost at time. So but you have already, in the choice of answers that you've given to these questions, answered quite a number of questions that have come in from the audience. So I mean, to me, that's quite lucky. And also it shows that the kinds of things that you already care about and are working on and want to highlight are resonating with the broad audience we have with us today. And I want to have you guys give a short round, just a short comment. If you wanted to extend out a message to other communities, maybe smaller communities, or give a message out to on an international scale, what kind of shout out would you want to give to folks who are working on these problems elsewhere? Just a short remark, and then I'll say thank you for your time, and we'll move to the closing session of this event.
Oh, I just say keep going. We're not stopping. You may see things in the news, but cities are very committed and are working hard on this. So keep going. We're going to keep going.
Wonderful.
Yeah, I think look for the allies, right? We're all doing very similar work, and maybe we could go faster if we did it together.
In I think 2018, I was at a climate conference that EPA Administrator Gina McCarthy was speaking at, and everyone was very despondent. And she was like, remember, it wasn't until the Obama administration that the federal government was really doing anything on climate change. You've been here before, and you can still do it. And I hate that I tell this story now at like basically every opportunity I can, but it was so impactful for me. So hope to share it with all of you.
Wonderful. Let me take this moment to extend my deepest gratitude. I am so thankful that you kindly agreed to spend some time with us today and talk about what's happening in your city and how you are leading in climate action from your own city and urban centers. So thank you for what you do, and thank you for contributing your thoughts and ideas to us today. So with that, I'm going to transition us to the close of this event, and what we have to close us out is a set of final remarks that are brought to us from Governor Bob Ferguson of Washington State, who further demonstrates how state leaders are accelerating climate action. In addition to the city leaders that have come with us today, the combined efforts of state and local leaders are showing that continued climate investment remains a priority. And we're fortunate to hear from Governor Ferguson now on how these investments are becoming a reality and can prompt further plans and actions in the months and the years to come. Thank you.
Hi everybody, I'm Washington State Governor Bob Ferguson, and thanks to the Brookings Institution for inviting me to say just a few words here today. So I think I can start by saying, I think we can all agree that it's more important now than ever to reaffirm the importance and the value of investing in the climate crisis and into a clean energy economy. I'm really proud to say that Washington State is a real leader in this space, and that's largely thanks to my predecessor. So I'm a new governor. I've been on the job for 6 months, but my predecessor was Jay Inslee, and he was governor for 12 years. And much of what I'll speak about in my brief remarks, a lot of that credit goes to Governor Inslee for being a true leader, not just here in Washington State on addressing climate and moving us to a clean energy economy, but he's really been a national and international leader as well. And so I think it's not an overstatement to say that, especially in these times, Washington State can really serve as a model for other states in our country. And I want to give you a few examples. So at a high level, despite the chaos and the uncertainty from the other Washington, my administration here in Washington State is committed, just as Governor Inslee was, to a clean energy economy. In contrast to Congress and the Trump administration, which recently cut billions in these investments and tax incentives to move to a clean energy economy, here in Washington State, we're doubling down. We're continuing to invest in addressing the climate crisis. And I just want to give you a couple of examples. A key aspect of this is our Washington State Climate Commitment Act, which provides the state with dedicated climate funding. And before I go any further, I just want to say this was passed into law under Governor Inslee's leadership by our state legislature. Some folks sought to overturn it. It went to the ballot just last November. And I think the percentage of Washingtonians who approved, who wanted this to continue, was over 60%. We saw majority support not just in blue counties like King County, but in red counties as well. So the people are really behind this. So I want you to know that as you may be working in states that politics might be a little bit different than Washington State, but I want to be clear the Climate Commitment Act is one that is supported by a huge majority of Washingtonians. So because of that act, the CCA, in a little over 2 years, we've generated over $3 billion in dedicated climate funding in our state. So we're able to continue to make ambitious progress on climate and the clean energy economy. So the dollars that are coming in now fund climate transit programs, clean transportation, emissions reductions, and so much more. It funds climate adaptation and resiliency projects for vulnerable populations on the Pacific Coast, like the Quinault Indian Nation. In fact, we cut the ribbon on their new tsunami and flooding evacuation and emergency shelter earlier this week. Another exciting climate finance development is Washington State's Green Bank. When launched, this program will provide financing to make clean energy projects affordable for all Washingtonians, especially low-income and underserved communities. These projects will help reduce carbon emissions and create jobs, bolstering the environment and the economy. Importantly, these projects also provide long-term savings through energy efficiency and home weatherization, increasing affordability for Washingtonians. And one more example I'll leave you with. Just a couple weeks ago, former Governor Inslee joined me here in Washington State. We have a wonderful ferry system that connects our island communities, and we actually went out on the first maiden voyage of the largest hybrid electric ferry in the entire United States. And I just signed off on the construction of 3 more ferry vessels, all of which will be electric, as we move to electrifying our entire fleet of vessels that serve Washington State. So these are just a few examples of how Washington State is financing climate into the future. And as governor, here's my promise. We're not going to sit still while the federal government strips away climate protection. Quite the opposite. We're not going to let the chaos of the Trump administration stop our investment in the future of our communities. And we're going to ensure that Washington State continues to build a healthier and cleaner future. So I really encourage you to check out the Climate Commitment Act. It's really a fantastic law, again, adopted by our legislature and approved by the voters when challenged at the ballot box, approved by the voters in huge numbers. It'll give you all the details on how we get that funding, how the dollars are spent, but it's really going to move us forward in a really challenging time. Thank you again. Really appreciate it.